What's happening, people? Shay here, uneven bounce. Hope you guys are well. So I'm joined by familiar face. You can see Rajiv Radhakrishnan here today. Rajiv, how you doing, mate?
Yes, very well, thank you, Shay. All good.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're here to discuss the man, the Zimbo, dare I even call him that, the man who changed, rejuvenated English cricket after the dismal 2-1 defeat at home to New Zealand in 1999. Coachless England, David Lloyd exited after the terrible home World Cup in 99. Remembering was out the group stage. Was it quarterfinals group stage? Can't remember exactly now. All those years ago. But yeah, obviously England lost. I always remember that moon ball, that Chris Gaines ball to Chris Reed, and looking like an absolute idiot at the time. But anyway, obviously Duncan Fletcher took over at that point. Obviously, he coached Glamorgan. I think he was actually at Western Province at the time, and then coached Glamorgan as well. That is, had experience in English cricket already, but went on a fantastic run for 8 years, which included an Ashes victory. But listen, I'll let obviously Rajiv cover the highlights. But yeah, a man who very much shaped English cricket, especially the Test domain. They were languishing. I think the bottom position around 8th when he took over, and it was all pretty much uphill from there. Obviously, a few slip roads in there, but it was a really upward trajectory on the whole, alongside captain Nasser Hussain and obviously Michael Vaughan after him. Anyway, as always, I'll shut up now. Leave the floor to Rajiv. Just before I do shut up, though, Rajiv, can I just say, were you recently in the States?
Yes, I was. I was in America last week.
I saw that. Guys, you must go and check out Rajiv's YouTube channel. It's really cool because every video is like under a minute, like all shorts. It's really short, snappy, interesting content. It's really cool. So yeah, go and check him out, but we'll plug him a bit later on. Anyway, Rajiv, over to you, man. If you want to go through, the Fletcher Years, as we call this video.
Indeed, So Duncan Fletcher, as you said, appointed in the autumn of 1999 after a debacle in the preceding summer. And just to give a little bit of context and a bit of history, it was only 13 years before that England actually ever, for the first time, appointed a full-time manager or coach. It was Mickey Stewart, Alex Stewart's father, who took over, who was appointed in 1986 for that winter tour, that famous winter tour to Australia, and it was very successful. And it's from that point that the development of this particular job description began. And at that time, it was only one coach, perhaps an assistant one, and a scorer that were made up the backroom staff, perhaps a physio too. So you're looking at about 2 or 3 people, not very many. And Mickey Stewart held the job for 6 years with reasonable success. There was an Ashes victory and 2 World Cup finals. Nothing wrong with that. And then Keith Fletcher took over from him, and that was a disaster. A lot of losses. I felt a bit sorry for Keith Fletcher, former England captain, played for Essex as well. And then it was Ray Illingworth. He had a bit of a turbulent time with the players. And then it was David Lloyd, who had 3 years. And, there was some success there. They beat South Africa for the first time. The first time they won a 5-test series in over a decade, since
98.
7 Ashes. But there was always a love-hate relationship with the coaches and the managers who were in charge. And throughout that period, more and more backroom staff was starting to be added. And we look back at the 1990s as the dark ages of cricket, of English cricket rather. We look back now 2 decades later, and we can sort of firmly say that they were the darkest ages, and coincided with me following the game in my formative years. So not the greatest time for me either. But then, what happened is they looked around for a new coach, and the thing about Duncan was that he was not English. He was from Zimbabwe. He had played in the World Cup before Zimbabwe had got Test status. Zimbabwe came here in '83 during that World Cup. Graham Hick was in the squad. So Duncan Fletcher, he may not have played Test cricket, but he certainly would have if Zimbabwe were eligible at the time. So it wasn't that he wasn't, people think, he never played Test cricket. Well, that's not because of his ability. It was the fact that it just wasn't accessible for him. So he was certainly worth his place as a player, as a coach. I think we need to specify now what we mean by coach and what we mean by manager, because that term has been used interchangeably. Duncan Fletcher was a coach. He actually improved the players. He had a deep technical knowledge of the game. And that was seen in county cricket and in domestic South African cricket. But, when he was appointed, I don't think many people, however passionate they were about English cricket, had ever heard of this gentleman. All the others before that, Rayling was a former captain of England, David Lloyd, an umpire, a captain of England, a player for England, a coach at Lancashire. Everyone knew
he was the first foreign coach for England, right?
First foreign coach, yes, and the first non-Test player. Keith Fletcher, his namesake, no relation. He had captained England as well. So you had people who were well known within the county circuit, well known within the establishment, and then suddenly you get this left field decision to bring in Duncan Fletcher, but obviously of English heritage, part of the colonial kind of feel in South Africa, in Zimbabwe rather, and sort of to bring a sort of a fresh feel and a fresh perspective to English cricket, which was in probably the worst place for a long, long time. So England, after the debacle of the World Cup in 1999, which they didn't actually do too badly, it was just a fluke result that Zimbabwe ironically beat South Africa in a group stage match, which kicked out England. So England weren't that bad, and then
it was group stage, wasn't it? England knocked out group stage.
They didn't get past the first stage.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah,
they didn't get into the Super Six stage. They lost to India, and there was then all this kind of there was a lull, a real sort of greyness descended across the sport, over the sport, and what it was is that the ECB, in their wisdom, had thought, there's going to be street parties and there's going to be all these kind of cricket games out on the streets. It never happened. They even released a song, embarrassingly, and England, the shop window, failed to qualify. And then on top of that, they held it in May. They started the World Cup in May, which they did again in 2019. Obviously, the results were different. And the reason I was against that in 1999, as I was in 2019, was that May time is exam time for the youngsters, for those at university, those GCSEs, A levels. May time is then, and the ball is swinging around a lot more with the moisture in early spring. And you need the games instead to be played in June, July, when the pitches are a lot harder and conducive for games lasting 100 overs and the ball isn't moving around. You want these games to go the distance. And you have the kids on summer holidays, the students who will come to the games, but none of that happened in 1999. And then the hangover after the World Cup, New Zealand came, and I read about this in Wisden, so I'm going to copy what they said, and I do agree with it. If you look at Wisden 2000, and with all due respect to New Zealand, who are a great side and great people, having them come over when they weren't such an exciting team with the hangover of the World Cup wasn't probably the best solution. Obviously, the fixtures were done a lot further in advance. And now they sacked Alex Stewart as captain, both as Test and ODI captain, which I thought was very harsh because he had done very well the previous summer, led England to that victory that we talked about.
South Africa, yeah.
And the Ashes the previous winter, it was 3-1, but it could so easily have been 2-2. Michael Slater got a reprieve. There was a glitch in the technology, and the 100 he scored was the difference between England winning and losing that match. And it just shows that those little things can really change things. And it could so easily have been 2-2 in Australia, which would have been a fantastic result for England in that era against that Australian team.
Was that the series where Dean Headley took 6 for at Sydney?
That was the Melbourne Test, yeah.
Well, the Melbourne Test, was it? I remember there was a ton of seagulls or pigeons.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember these fucking pictures full of birds.
Yep.
running through. Anyway,
it was a great. And Alex Stewart was on top of the world. I mean, and they could so easily won that 5th Test in Sydney, but it didn't happen. Yeah. They came back, and the World Cup. We'll call it a debacle. I think that's being a bit harsh for England. But anyway, so they decided to get rid of Alex Stewart. He was very hurt by it, very disappointed, and understandably. And they went for Nazar Hussain as England captain. Now, for me, Nazar Hussain at the beginning, and just to give you an idea of the disorganisation in English cricket at the time, Nazir Hussain wasn't good enough to be in the World Cup squad at the beginning of the summer. Atherton got injured and Nazir Hussain was called in to replace him. And in the first match of the World Cup, he was asked to open the batting with Alex Stewart because Nick Knight was suffering from a lack of form. Now, Nazir Hussain was 31 in 1999, and according to his autobiography, he had never opened in any form of cricket, ever. From the under sevens up until that point, he was asked to do a completely new job, at the beginning of a World Cup, the opening match against the previous champions, the holders Sri Lanka, which to me is just indicative of what the disorganisation of English cricket was at the time, to ask someone to do that. And he obviously struggled. England may have won that match, but Nazir Hussain was good. And now, a few months later, he's not good enough to be in the ODI side at the beginning, the ODI squad, and now he's suddenly captain of England across both formats. In those days, it was still pretty much your captain of both. They were starting to diverge, but at that point, it was still pretty much there's one captain. And Nazir Hussain took over. Now, as a Test player, he deserved to be in the side. He'd got back into the side in '96 after sort of a 3-year gap, and he was making sufficient scores just to be in the side, but he wasn't making huge runs like, say, consistent level, say, of someone like Graham Thorpe. But anyway, he was in there, and Duncan Fletcher yet to be appointed, or yet to take over. He had been appointed, but he couldn't take over until he finished his county commitments. And the series against New Zealand was another disaster. They lost 2-1, and there was a lot of anger and resentment in the England camp from the sources that I've read. Reason is there was a hangover from the World Cup.
Who ran the team during that series?
Because it would have been Nazir Hussain. I think they might have had an assistant coach helping out with sort of the logistics, more of a manager, Phil Neal, I guess. But in terms of training and stuff like that, I'm not sure. It probably would have fallen on Nazir Hussain's shoulders. So what happened is, there was a lot of resentment. The performance in the World Cup, there were the player pay rows, something about the money, and then the payment that they were due. And then what happened is that Lords, Nazir Hussain got injured, and he gave the reins to Graham Thorpe, who was the next senior player in the side. He didn't give it to Alex Stewart, who was playing. Atherton hadn't come back yet. And Graham Thorpe stood in and led for the rest of that Test match. And then when it came to Old Trafford, Nazir Hussain was still injured, but they didn't give Graham Thorpe the captaincy. They gave it to Mark Butcher. And this added a lot of more resentment from Graham Thorpe, who turned up in a very dark mood at Old Trafford at the snub. And Mark Butcher, captain, who wasn't probably worth his place in the side, and he would be dropped for the next Test, which probably rubbed more salt into Graham Thorpe's wounds. And just on a side point, when I met Mark Butcher at an event, I sort of complained, because Graham Thorpe's one of my heroes. I said, I'm really annoyed that you took that. He started laughing, saying it wasn't exactly my fault, was it? But anyway, so amidst all of this, and then Atherton came back. And I remember Atherton at Old Trafford, the match that Mark Butcher, in fact, captain, won off. He scored 11 runs in 235 minutes. I checked it again to make sure that I got that right. 11 runs in 235 minutes. It was Manchester, cold, grey, grim. The opposition wasn't, and again, no disrespect to New Zealand, it wasn't a sexy opposition. And there was this that whole feel of just dullness and gloom and misery. And it really was like that. I was 20 at the time, just about to enter my third year of university. And then added that the Fort Butcher issue, the pay rows, all of this. Alex Stewart still out smarting, so that after being sacked, so you had all of this baggage, and Nazir Hussain has now come in to take charge. And probably you may want to add in the fact that he was born in India. He's half Indian from Tamil Nadu, and he's coming to captain England. Yes, he sounds very English. He was educated here. He lived here since he was 7. But and he's taken over. And now they lose the series, and the booing at the Oval when they lost was sort of, it really was heart-wrenching. And there wasn't an official ranking in those days. The unofficial rankings, it was 9 out of 9. At that time, there were 9 Test nations. And amidst this, Duncan Fletcher now comes onto his first day before the winter tour to South Africa. So he has all of this to manage, and Graham Thorpe pulls out of the South Africa tour too.
Why was that?
Well, he'd been touring with England A and England for 10 years, and therefore he wanted some time out. But I reckon he was still smarting. He was really peeved about not getting the captaincy there. I think that really did affect him.
Did his personal marital issues not kick in at that point?
No, it was about to go south in a couple of years. I think it was beginning now.
2002 was the worst, the low point.
That was the worst
in India series.
2002, Thorpe was at his.
He was a mess, absolute mess. I remember.
But the seeds were being already planted now.
Yeah.
So England went on that tour. Atherton went, Stewart went, Hussain went. They took Mark Butcher. But the others were just a scattergun approach of selections. They just wanted to please the public, who were so sick and tired of the old guard. They wanted some fresh blood. So they picked in some guys, with all due respect, were picked just because they were new rather than they were good enough. So Hick, Ramprakash and Crawley were discarded. Ramprakash was seething. And Crawley probably a bit hard done by. Hick, I think, by this time we'd had enough of him. Ramprakash had a very good previous winter against Australia, and I think that was harshly done by.
He did okay against Africa in the 98 summer as well. He did okay.
He did, yeah. So he was in about a 12, 18-month period. He was averaging about 40. So I think he was harshly done by. Anyway, they went there and they took, they did take two interesting players. They took, one interesting, Michael Vaughan they took.
Yeah.
And Duncan Fletcher, apparently in the nets when he was watching Michael Vaughan, he also went up to Nazir Hussain and said, "Can you tell me a little bit about Marcus Trescothick, who wasn't on the tour?" And Nazir Hussain,
in 2000s West Indies, I remember.
Yeah, Nazir Hussain said he wasn't too sure about Marcus Trescothick. Nothing bad, but he just didn't have the knowledge. And Duncan Fletcher said he had seen him play an innings in the county championship, and he said there was something about him he saw, and he plucked him for the next summer. And I think out of all of Duncan Fletcher's work, he's remembered for bringing in Vaughan and Trescothick, who had very average county scores.
Yeah.
They were averaging in the 30s, but he saw something in them. And they're probably two of his best sort of achievements, if you like. Vaughan and Trescothick, who would go on to have, pretty good careers, shortened careers for different reasons, both of them. But they could have played a little longer, but for different reasons we don't need to go into. They didn't extend it as much as they could have, or should have. But anyway, so Duncan Fletcher it takes over. They lose 2-1 in South Africa, and that last test was a hollow victory for reasons we found out later with the Hansi.
Yeah.
But from the sources I've read and the books I've read about it, when Duncan Fletcher first took over, he sort of put things on a whiteboard and was trying to explain sort of the percentages and the numbers of what they can each do in order to improve their game. And I don't think many people really took him seriously. They didn't see, I think they were still in that sort of feel that he was a manager, not a coach from previous eras. And I think at that elite level at that time, you were pretty much left to your own devices. The coaching is done from when you're, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13 through your teenage years. When you get to the final product as an England player, how much extra coaching do you need? But I think Duncan Fletcher wanted to sort of really dig into the players and speak to them about the technical requirements they needed for different conditions in different surfaces, for different bowlers, etc., and different batsmen. And you look at it now, and there's a coach for everything. So you go from that sort of 20 years ago, and now we have a coach for everything. We have a coach for spin bowling, coach for everything. Wicket keeping. Soon there's going to be a coach for first slip and then second slip. In 100 years' time, we'll probably see that. It's getting too much now. But anyway, Duncan Fletcher was there. But he was lucky now, Duncan Fletcher. 2000 comes along, and the other predecessor, the other coaches and the other captains before Hussain and Fletcher, they didn't have the luxury of central contracts. So the likes of Atherton and Stewart, when they finished a test match, as it had been for the last 100 years, they would go and play a county game the very next day, or a B&H Cup final or something like that. It was 7 days a week, mixed in with the test matches, so there was no respite. But then the central contracts came in, and that was a great piece of luck for Duncan Fletcher. And now he can ring fence these.
That was because of Rod Marsh.
Rod Marsh is now the academy coach for England. Yes.
2000.
So that helped. But all the stars aligned. You got to remember, whenever we measure success, we've got to look at all the environmental factors that add to that kind of success. I'm not saying Duncan Fletcher would have been better than Alex Shaw, or worse than Mickey Stewart, say, if he in the same scenarios, but you've got to put that all into context. When you've got players who have fresher legs, especially the bowlers.
Well, Goff and Caddick benefited massively because he weren't the fittest guys in the world, especially Darren Goff. He really benefited. I think even Andrew Flintoff, during that period, because he was overweight. Let's be honest. When he made his debut in '98, he was overweight. He was known as a bit of a log lad and whatnot. So by being protected,
not bad for a fat lad,
I remember that famous line. But being protected, wrapped in cotton wool, and protected from the county cricket scene really helped, because Fletcher didn't have a huge amount. Let's be honest, he didn't have a huge amount to work with in terms of innate ability. That's why he had to use laser eyes and see ability in people like Vaughan Trescothick. He made some blunders. Let's forget, he picked Gavin Hamilton for that tour, who got a pair and I think non for 60 or something in the one Test match. He also picked Chris Adams for all 5 Test matches. And if you remember correctly, like this conversation between him and Nasser Hussain, he didn't really know too much of Chris Adams. And he saw Chris Adams in the nets and said to Nasser Hussain, "There's something wrong with this guy's hands. There's something wrong with his hands." But Chris Adams, from memory, played all 5 Test matches and never played again for England. He flopped in every Test, and I don't believe he played again Test cricket for England. That stands to be corrected, but I don't think he played again after that series.
I don't think he played Test cricket. He might have played ODIs after that.
He didn't play Test though. That was it. It was 5 Test days, and that was it. He was done.
Yeah, and I think with Duncan Fletcher, he had a very when he saw something, he was very fixated on it, and probably didn't give the chance that maybe he deserved another chance and to prove him wrong. So, for example, every season, Martin Bicknell would always be top of the averages. He played in 1993. And then Duncan Fletcher would say, "Well, what speed does he bowl at?" And he would say, 80. And Duncan Fletcher said, 80. Sorry, he's not going to be playing for Test cricket. You can't be bowling 80 miles an hour and opening the bowling for England. Not good enough. But they did bring him back in 2003, 10 years later. But I don't think he gave we'll come back to that, some of the negative sides. He didn't give the opportunity for the players to prove him wrong.
Well, he played James Kirtley and Martin Cypress in 2003. He eventually started playing medium fast trundlers. Exactly. You could argue, it's funny how he did a U-turn.
And he did have his favorite. I'll come to his sort of very his favorites and not favorites. So he had that issue. That criticism has been pointed at him, but I think with Duncan Fletcher, so the central contracts come in, and he now starts to do the actual coaching. The famous, infamous forward press that we always talk about, providing that technical kind of insight. And 2000 comes, and now England beat Zimbabwe, which they should have done, and they beat the West Indies for the first time in 32 years at home as well. And Nasser Hussain is now struggling with the runs, but yet that's okay. They can paper over that crack because England are winning, and they then go to Pakistan. And they win handsomely there. They win that last Test in the dark in Karachi, and now Nasser Hussain's batting starts to get better. And then they win in Sri Lanka after being 1-0 down, and they go and win the last 2 Tests. Very low scoring, very fractious tour. The teams weren't getting on. And what I find interesting is the way of course, I'm not going to pretend that there's a little bit of bias on both sides. I've got a foot in both camps. But for me, what was almost disappointing is that in 2001, yes, Sri Lanka had a very, very good side. A young Jai Warner, young Sangakkara, Murali, and then the older statesmen with Aravinda and Jayasuriya. So it was a very good side. But I found it sort of strange that in 2001, where Sri Lanka had only been playing for 19 years at that stage, is that the hype that, hey, we beat Sri Lanka was so great. It was almost like, well, hang on, they've only been playing cricket for 19 years, but it was also like a real boon towards the Sri Lankan authorities for England to be so upbeat that we went to Sri Lanka and we won. Now, if you say, I went to Australia and I won, they've an established team for like 150 years or whatever, and there's a lot of history, and it's 5 Test matches, and we know how hard it is to win in Australia. But for Sri Lanka, who were up until 5 years before that were considered to be the worst of the 9 Test nations, understandably. And now it was like,
that's true, but you mentioned before, see, they won the World Cup in '96. Plus, they beat England at home in '98, where Murray took 16 wickets in a Test match, didn't he?
Yep.
At the Oval. So I think they took Sri Lanka very seriously.
Yeah,
and there was always a bit of needle between the two sides.
There was a lot of needle.
Yeah, Ranatunga and a lot of aggression there on both sides. I'd say Darren Goff and altercations that he and Stewart did, and so I think they were desperate to win. I mean, I still think I appreciate what you're saying about Sri Lanka being a very new side Test arena, but they had some wonderful plays even in that period. Absolutely wonderful plays.
All at the peak. It's a shame we can't say that now about them, but yeah. So
cycles, I guess, but.
So they won the 4 series in a row. Everything's happy. The partnership between Hussain and Fletcher is blossoming, and everyone's very positive about these two. And it's 4 series, and now the Ashes summer is approaching 2001. And just as a bit of a reward, Graham Thorpe is now back, and he's scoring well. He did brilliantly in Sri Lanka, did brilliantly in Pakistan. And he's been returned to the fold, and they rewarded him with the ODI captaincy at the end of the series against Sri Lanka when Naz Hussain didn't want to risk any further injury and went home, and the ODIs were captained by Thorpe. Anyway, we come back to the Ashes 2001, and England have got a very good side in order to compete. They've got Thorpe, they've got Hussain, Atherton, Stewart, Michael Vaughan. Everything is looking rosy, Caddick, Goff, etc. But then a string of injuries happen, and I think Thorpe only played 1 Test. Hussain was injured for 2, and it was 4-1 before.
Was that when Craig White played the 5th bowler?
He could have done, but I can't recall Craig White coming. Yeah, but I remember. Yeah, Trescothick.
Alex Tudor was there as well.
Yep, and Trescothick had made his debut in 2000 now, and was having a great time. So he picked him in 2000, and England were looking a solid unit. But unfortunately, I think they had a bit of ill luck. I think Australia still would have won, even if they had the full team. But it was still looking good and developing nicely. And then 2001, we see the end of Mike Atherton's career. He retires, and then Duncan Fletcher now has his first proper controversy or issue, not controversy, a sort of argument with some of the players, where Alex Stewart wants to pick and choose the winter tours he wants to go on. There was a bit of a falling out there. They were arguing about that, and in the end, Duncan Fletcher said, "No, you can't pick and choose. You can pick and choose which format, but you can't pick and choose which country." Because Alex Stewart didn't want to go to India, but he wanted to go to New Zealand. And anyway, it was played out in the press a little bit, but nothing too major, and it was all patched up by 2002 when Alex Stewart was eligible again to play after the winter. So now, throughout this process, even despite the Ashes debacle, maybe that's a bit of a strong word, debacle, people are really talking about Duncan Fletcher thinking outside of the box, very technical, a real thinker on the game. Also, with his rugby roots, he also was very keen on exploring the coaching opportunities within rugby as well, which I cannot speak about. So you got this real technician now, and he's not someone who's like a headless chicken, like David Lloyd, who would go in front of the press and say things without thinking, a little bit like what he does now in the commentary box.
The commentary box,
but it's more humorous there, and we can let that be. Duncan Fletcher, a very measured, thoughtful person, and he didn't seem to act in haste and repent in leisure, or whatever the term is. And I think England needed that grounding where you've got someone who doesn't get the names of the players wrong, like we had with Ted Dexter, for example. He has a good knowledge of the game, who's playing which county crane, and he's bringing things to the table. But on the flip side of that, going back to what I was saying, he did start now to develop his favourites. And if you look at, say, Rob Key, he played his last Test match at the age of 25, which I think was very harsh, considering what a quality player Rob Key is.
So 2004.
The South African Tour, 2004-5, yeah.
4-5, yeah.
Yeah, 4-5. So he was about mid-20s. Fantastic player, and I think he should have played more. He got that wonderful double 100 at Lords, but he didn't fit the bill. And again, with with Andrew Flintoff, even though he played a lot under Duncan Fletcher, they didn't hit it off. And again, he was pretty much sidelined. And then it would happen again with Monty Panesar. And another guy, Jamie Ormond, who's obviously famous for that wonderful sledge with Mark Waugh, when he turned up to New Zealand in 2002 after that Ashes tour at home series, He was overweight.
That boy was seriously talented. The English should have got more out of him.
Exactly. But
I
if
remember
you
he
cross
played for
Duncan
Surrey,
Fletcher,
but you left sure and sorry from memory. He was a ex-Surrey boy though.
He played for, I think so. Yeah, but if
very
you cross, if you cross Duncan Fletcher, it's very hard to get back into that fold. That's the impression I get. He expects extremely high standards, but he doesn't give you a second chance. So I think there's a bit of a stubborn streak in there. And he did have his inner circle. He liked Chris Reed. He liked Trescothick. He liked Michael Vaughan. He got on with them very much with Nazir Hussain as well. But people outside of that didn't. So, and Geraint Jones, another favourite of his, very much over Chris Reed, Ashley Giles again. And he got those favourites together for that 05 Ashes. So England, by the way, sorry, I've skipped ahead. 02, they have a home series against India and Sri Lanka, do reasonably well. They beat Sri Lanka as expected. India, I think they drew 1-1, and then they go to the Ashes. And the Ashes, unfortunately, Graham Thorpe pulls out now because his marriage issues are becoming serious, headline news. Robert Key takes his place, and the Ashes, they lose 4-1. They win the last Test match.
The beginning of the end for Simon Jones. Very sad, unfortunately, but that was the beginning of the end. That knee injury that he incurred in the first Test.
But now the issue is you've got Nazir Hussain and Duncan Fletcher dealing with non-cricketing issues. It's taking away the attention from the World Cup that was after that because of the political situation in Zimbabwe and whether England should tour there. Now, the government of the UK can't tell you which sporting team can go and play. They have no obligation or right to do that. And Nazir Hussain was saying at the time, he said, it shouldn't be left up to me. There should be some kind of body within the UK who makes those decisions, whether a sporting team should go in England. He said, I'm just an England cricket captain. I cannot be making these decisions. But he had to. It got very stressful. They had a miserable World Cup, as was the case. And let's not forget, Duncan Fletcher probably didn't put as much effort or time or thought into one-day cricket. He wasn't that interested. He was trying to get the Test team together, which he did, but that was at the cost, at the detriment of the ODI side. He just didn't probably have that kind of interest. Anyway, so then 2003, they play South Africa, they do well. Thorpe comes back, it's a great century, and now England are starting to win consistently. 03, 04, and then the whole of the 04 summer, they won 7 Test matches in a row. Everything's rosy. They go to South Africa and do well. And, Duncan Fletcher is really building this side up nicely for that 05 Ashes, and he's worked out a plan. He took over in 99, and by 05, he's weeded out what he doesn't want, and he's got what he needs. So he got rid of the scarring along with Michael Vaughan. He wanted to get rid of the Hussains, not get rid of, but he was happy that the 05 Ashes would have no one in that team who knew what it was like to lose an Ashes series. They were all brand new to Ashes cricket in 05, except Marcus Trescothick and Michael Vaughan, sorry. There were a few that had a few scars, but generally they were completely brand new to it. He dropped. Yeah,
Flintoff didn't play, did he, in 02 or 03 or 2001?
No, Flintoff's first Ashes was 05.
05, yeah, he didn't play the 02 or 03.
Debut was 05.
In fact, that 02 or 03 squad was just plagued with injury. It was just shot to bits.
So, yeah, there was a lot of injuries. And this is despite the central contracts. We thought that would have helped to resolve some of that. But it gets to 05, and this is probably the peak of his powers. And he has the side that he wants. Kevin Peterson is now a feature who probably wasn't one of Duncan Fletcher's favourites. I'm guessing. I don't have any basis to say that. But
well, they were together for what, barely 18 months.
It would have been 18 months. Yeah, not much. But with Kevin Peterson, you only needed 5 minutes, don't you? So
yeah, good point. Yeah,
but they dropped Thorpe before that 05 Ashes.
Yeah, that was a big thing. That was a big thing. Thorpe Peterson,
Thorpe Peterson. Well, for me, it wasn't ever a debate about Thorpe Peterson. They should have dropped Ian Bell, who had a very poor series in that Ashes 05.
So Ian Bell, the MBE, him and Collingwood. I remember that.
And Collingwood for getting 7 runs. I mean, to me, to drop Graham Thorpe, he was 35 at the time, 36, and his average against Australia was amazing. And I would have Graham Thorpe batting at number 4 or 5 over even over Peterson. I would probably do it. He was as solid as they come, and England. The Rock for 12 years, from 93 to 05, one of my favourite players, and gave so much for England. But they dropped him, but it didn't And England were lucky to win that 05 Ashes. Let's not forget that. They were very lucky. It was a great series, 2-1, but very lucky. I think a lot of, whilst it was a great thing, and the subs he wanted to, I think it's like Gary Pratt.
Gary Pratt, yeah.
Jokes. And the subs too. While it was a great thing, a great boon for English cricket, it was great to be part of that. I was 26th, the atmosphere was brilliant. I think it papered over some of the cracks that were still structural issues within English cricket. Remember, Kevin Peterson came from abroad to play. He wasn't a product of the system, and I don't think Geraint Jones was. He came from Australia or Papua New Guinea, but and the homegrown players, how well were they performing? Vaughan. Everyone says, Ashes winning captain. He had one good score in that series. And a person who went under the radar for me was Trescothick. He averaged 40. He made a telling score in every single match, but no one remembers him for his contribution. And I think he deserves the plaudits for being that. Anyway, so 05. And now he's got 2 more years left in his tenure. Things start to go awry before the next Ashes series in 06-07. They lose Trescothick for personal reasons. Vaughan is injured, and then Flintoff is captain. And we know that what happened there, the drinking and everything, the pedalo and all that kind of stuff. And then and now in 2007, after that Ashes debacle and after the World Cup debacle, and the Ashes, that was 5-0, I remember that, against the Galaxy of Stars. You had Hayden, Gilchrist, Langer. Yeah. They were all coming towards the end of their career. Shane Warne retired at the end of it as well. McGrath, Ponting.
McGrath retired,
And a bit of insulting, I think, to Duncan Fletcher was that they wanted a review after that winter with the World Cup and the Ashes debacle of the last 4 or 5 years. And Duncan Fletcher was saying, well, look, it was only a one bad winter. The last 4 or 5 years have been pretty damn good. And he was right. So this whole, and these massive reviews, the ECB commission, and people spend hours and money going through all of this, and then you just get 1 or 2 decisions afterwards. It's all, cosmetic kind of, let's just job justification rather. And speaking on that point of job justification, Nazir Hussain said a very good thing, a very accurate thing about Duncan Fletcher. He said a lot of people in English cricket or in sport general, or in any kind of life, are more concerned about keeping their job rather than doing their job. Duncan Fletcher, he did his job. He wasn't there just to keep it. So therefore, he would have to make tough decisions, controversial decisions, and maybe rub people up the wrong way in order to get what he thought was best for English cricket. And he took England over. He took over England at the worst possible place, and then he left it in a far better state. Yes, the Ashes was still an issue, but you try winning an Ashes series when you've got the greatest side in history, perhaps, or second greatest side in history, all coming together in that great Australian vehicle that it was, machine rather. But he brought a sense of purpose and a sense of thought to English cricket, and he gave them confidence. Yes, he was assisted by other things outside, like the central contracts. He provided a sense of balance, a sense of being measured, and a sense of fairness, except for the bigs. I think when he didn't treat his players, he had his favourites. Apart from that, I think that we have to criticise him on that. And I think being non-English, I think, helped. He brought that kind of objective view, that certain feel of freshness. And I think out of all the coaches we've had since Mickey Stewart up until now, I think Chris Silver Chris Silver does remind me a little bit of him. He's not going off at a tangent, not making rash decisions. There's a sense of thought and structure, helped by the fact that you've got so much backroom staff to assist you with that. And I looked at his stats for Duncan Fletcher. He was in charge for 96 Test matches, won 42 and lost 30, drew 24. Very good. And ODIs, as much as I say that he wasn't interested in ODIs, 164, 74 wins and 81 losses and no result 9. So, that's nearly 50-50. Could have been better. And obviously, in that era, they were playing a different brand of ODI cricket to what they are playing now. Perhaps he could have, made that kind of, given them that license when he was in charge, but that would come in 2015. And now, I think as far as I understand, he's settled down in Zimbabwe or maybe South Africa. And he also went on to coach India as well.
4 years
But
there, yeah.
English cricket owes a lot of gratitude towards him to get out of those dark ages of the 1990s and put in place a sense of freshness and hope, and to give that confidence back to the players and to the fans. And I think his ultimate accolade can be that '05 Ashes, and memories that we will always remember. 17 years on, 16 years on.
I think overall, you look at the top coach of the last 25 years in English cricket. Obviously, Fletcher's up there along with Andy Flower, in my opinion. Would you say if you to rate the 1 and 2 between the two of them, you can obviously argue Bayliss obviously winning the World Cup, but that was by obviously a slip, let's be honest, in that final against New Zealand. If you looked overall at the kind of the tenures of Flower and Fletcher, who would you say was the most successful, bearing in mind all the external factors the team had to work with, etc., Rajiv?
I always say the coach is as good as his players, and a coach is also assisted by the strength of opposition. So Andy Flower, when he was coach, his team didn't have to come up against the nagging accuracy of Glenn McGrath and Shane Warne. They didn't have a bully like Hayden, Langer, Gilchrist.
It was a very average Australian team as well. Let's be honest, very average Australian team.
Yeah, compared to that side, yeah. And
signature wins. You would look at you see the 05 Ashes for Fletcher. And you would say obviously Flower did in 10-11.
10-11
in Australia. Obviously, they won 09, but they also beat India, which for me is probably tipped the scale. I know he served less time. He did about. Well, it was the 13-14 series we've culminated in his end, isn't it, in 2014. But 5-year stint, 8-year stint. Okay, obviously a lot more time for Fletcher, but I think Flower just nicks it for me, in that respect.
Probably, yeah. The win in India in 12-13 was a fantastic victory. Yeah. With I remember some of the great memories at Mumbai and watching Swan and Panasa and Kevin Peterson's 186. Yeah. I mean, that's you won't get a better cricket than that. And they were 1-0 down, if I remember correctly. And they went on to win that. And to win in India is no mean task. And since then, they've lost in 2016 quite badly. And then again, 12 months ago. But I think I don't want to sound like Shane Warne when he says, a coach is there just to drive, not to be. He says a coach takes me from the hotel to the ground. He's referring to that kind of coach. You look around now and the amount of extra material available, whether that's human or laptops or whatever. And there is a lot of luck as well. You got to, you look at, I've forgotten his name. He was coached twice, and I think he got sacked unfairly.
Peter Morse.
Peter Morse. That chap, he came in at the wrong time, at the wrong place on 2 occasions, and I know he's faced a lot of criticism, etc. But for me, it is down to the players. They're the ones that are there. And also, if you're opposition, if you're playing against like Viv Richards' team or Clive Lloyd, no matter how much coaching you can do, you're not gonna win. So I think the coach can only take you so far, and it's down to the players. It's their responsibility. Having said that, I don't want to detract anything that Duncan Fletcher has done, because he did coach. He wasn't just a manager, like, for example, Graham Gooch when he managed England out of Phil Neal later on. That these guys, they were more on the logistics side. This is actual cricket coaching, and they did improve their play, the performances. Flower, didn't well, but he didn't handle Peterson very well. Well, I think, as much as I'd like to defend Peterson, if you look at every team he's played in, he's had some issue. Domestic in South Africa, he came and played 2 counties here. They had an issue, and then with England. So, I mean, either all of these teams, there's something wrong with all of these teams, or it's something wrong with Kevin Peterson. I mean, it's a bit difficult to.
I think, to be fair to AJ, I respect your opinion there, but I have to say, I think Flower didn't do too bad considering what happened. I think 2 big issues for Kevin Peterson were the fact that ECB's attitude towards IPL in 2008, obviously culminating in a contract in 09 with RCB, but also the captaincy issue. He was captain for about 6 months, got bombed out in start of 09 before the West Indies tour.
Yep.
Those two things really rank with him. And then Flower took over in 09, him and Strauss, obviously, that partnership there. And he had him for almost 5 years of his career. There was obviously difficulties there along the line. But I think he knew what he had in mercurial talent on his hands. I think he managed it okay, considering all the things I've mentioned before. AJ's followed up here another point. The outside managed to bring a team together with Peterson.
But how many chances? To answer AJ's question is like, how many chances can we give Kevin Peterson? He's, if it wasn't the TextGate, and then after that there was the debacle of the Ashes 2013, 2014, and if you read Kevin Peterson's autobiography, the way he spoke about Matt Pryor. And I have met Matt Pryor, obviously not in a dressing room. He's one of the most polite guys you can ever hope to imagine. Obviously, it's in a different, we don't know what it's like behind closed doors. But the way he slayed Matt Pryor, it was completely unprofessional. And, any hope he had of getting back into the England side was completely ruined by that book. It's very childish. And you got to remember, it's not just one person who's saying this. It's Graham Swan who's saying it. It's Matt Pryor. It's Alistair Cook. Alistair Cook, who, no one has a bad word to say about him. If all of these guys were, very well-respected individuals are all saying the same thing, and not just in the England team, but in other domestic sides at Nottinghamshire, I think he played, if I remember correctly.
Hampshire, sorry.
Hampshire. You got to think, well, hang on. Something's not right here. So, and I heard when I was at another function with Graham Gooch, and he said that in that debacle of the 13-14, and then we're going slightly off here with Kevin Peterson, I suppose Duncan Fletcher, but Kevin Peterson refused to bat at a particular position. I think it was number 3, and Graham Gooch had said, no, for the team, can you do this? And he calls like a very selfish kind of guy, I get the impression. And, he wasn't pulling in the team's way, and they sacked him in 2014. I don't think a player has ever been sacked. I don't know, in English cricket, but no. If he's your best player, then he has to play. Yeah. If you're that great a player, then you do give an extra bit of leeway. You do. But there comes to a point when how much leeway can you give just because you're the genius of the side? You have to draw the line at some point. And if all the evidence is stacking against you, now, for whatever reason, Duncan Fletcher and him didn't have an issue, so it was fine. I get the feeling that Andy Flower and Duncan Fletcher are very much on the same page when it comes to coaching. They're both from Zimbabwe. I don't think that has anything to do with it, but I get the feeling that it's fairly sort of same ethos.
But they're probably what's indicative of their tenures with that the Test team performed well during their reigns. Yep. Whereas it was Bayliss, Moores was a flop pretty much both times. Although he did a lot of groundwork, brought people through like Josh Bullock, etc. And even like Ben Stokes, but people like Bayliss for me came as a really reputable white ball coach. The KKR when IPL, he came with a good pedigree in one-day cricket, which obviously England wants to move towards after 2015. That's hence a bringing Trey Bayliss in, and he had some good success in Test Arena. But the reality was they were very much a middle-of-the-road Test team under Bayliss. They are under Chris Silverwood. They're the stars maybe aligned for the sides, but the reality is they're an average Test side. England now.
It is, and which goes back to my thing about your coach is only as good as your players. Your captain is only as good as your players. So
is it impossible now to have a great side in all 3 formats? Is it impossible?
Just generally, or are you talking about?
Well, I think it's just the game has evolved the last 20 years. The amount of cricket that's been played now, unless you've got a huge pool of players to pick from, for example, in India, is extremely difficult to actually call upon and actually be competitive in all 3 formats. Because England have flip-flopped between the 2. They've been a really good Test side and an average white ball side, and then vice versa, which is what we're seeing now. We're seeing a very, very good white ball side. But the reality is, as an England Test fan, you're not confident right now with the current state of the side. We all know we're going to get absolutely whacked out there in Australia. I don't think we hold much hope. That's the truth of it. But
I think
as a white ball side, the World Cup happened 2 weeks ago. We were expecting England to win, arguably, the World Cup. You see, so the expectations are quite different, I think, for either side. White and Red Bull.
Well, I think that if you look at like a sort of a grid reference and the different sort of parameters that have become more apparent in the last 15 years, is that you've got to think, what's the format? And the formats are diverging so much. So like when the West Indies were top of the tree in the 1980s and 70s and Australia later, the divergence between ODI and Test wasn't as pronounced. So West Indies would pick their Test team to play the ODI, and the game wasn't too different. So you didn't have to adapt too much. The scoring rates were still fairly similar. Now they're diverging so much; they're almost like different sports. So that's why, to answer your question, it's difficult to maintain that kind of level of intensity or performance in the three formats that we have now. And then on top of the other thing, the other parameter to add in, or other dimension to add in, is home and away. So the home sides are definitely more dominant than away sides. Teams are going and winning 4-0 and then coming back and losing 4-0, vice versa. So you've got all of those put in and plug that into the equation, and that's what you're trying to get. What you're getting out of it is that divergence in performance between formats and then home and away. So if England are now very good at ODI cricket, they'll go play away in a Test match. They're going to lose badly, and that's how the matrix is working at the moment. To go back to the coaching issue is: do you have three different coaches for the three different formats? And then with that, do you have three different fielding coaches for three different formats? It's going to happen, and it's getting a real mess. You look at a cricket calendar, and I know we're going off site tangent here on Duncan Fletcher, but with Duncan Fletcher in his era, it'd be interesting to know how he would have coped now playing three formats, 12 months a year, and having to not be able to probably go and see a county game because he doesn't have time. He would have to rely on other scouts to do it. In his time,
like Bayliss did. Like Bayliss did. He was admittedly the hardly ever saw. A lot of county players never saw. He wasn't even aware of the, not statistics necessarily, but the way they play, the skill sets, etc. They had to set him up close and personal, which was a luxury afforded to coaches back in Fletcher and before that age, like David Lloyd, etc. We've got a little point here. AJ has commented, which I'll leave us to you there, Rajiv, to answer.
Would have been successful they were successful in the formats that were available to them in ODI and Test. If T20 was around then, I'm fairly certain they would have. If you think of T20 2003, Gilchrist opening with Hayden in a T20. I mean, come on, and Shane Warne spinner and Glenn McGrath naggingly accurate. They wouldn't. And the bench strength they had in ODIs, they would have.
Well, Michael Bevan in T20 cricket, I think, would have been phenomenal.
Yeah, he would have been. He was a great finisher.
Wonderful player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. They would have been top of the tree in all three formats.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Last question before we wrap up here.
Sure.
From AJ. AJ, thanks very much, by the way, for all those questions. Great. I always really enjoy these questions. It helps to break the stream up.
Of course.
Yeah, possibly. Possibly.
Yeah, I think traditionally in that era, English cricket was very much more purist, and therefore it was all Ashes. And the reason is the Ashes hadn't come for a while. So that's why the obsession of winning that Ashes back after 20 years was the ultimate goal, and the ODI could wait. And then after that, when the Ashes started to come a bit more frequently, especially at home, then they were thinking, well, hang on, now it's time for white ball cricket, ICC tournaments that we need to do. It wasn't done in parallel. So I think it was just a cultural thing that England never really took ODI cricket that seriously, even though they were very good at it at the beginning of it. In the 80s, England were, the first 5 World Cups, England were in 3 finals and 2 semi-finals. Brilliant. The first 5, so let's not forget that. But then other teams started to develop and play more modern ODI cricket, and England just didn't keep up with that. And I think they just lacked interest because of the Ashes debacles. They wanted to focus their energies on getting that back. They did. So nowadays, though, in the modern era, the sort of the MTV, no, not MTV, whatever era we're in, sort of the iPod or smartphone kind of era, that instant gratification, ODI cricket is now on equal level with a Test cricket, and a World Cup is of equal value as an Ashes. And yeah, it's fair enough. I have my own personal reasons on that, but yeah, no, it's great.
No,
So, yeah.
we know you do, Rajiv. Anyway,
World Cup I see is very important. 50 over,
yeah.
definitely. These meaningless, but we won't go into that. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to call Christian and Sion back up again if we do that again. I think they'll very much want to partake in the next stream if you want to get get back into the hammering of 20 over cricket. Okay, cool. All right, Rajiv. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there, to be honest. We're hitting almost an hour. So, any last point you want to say about Duncan Fletcher before we round up?
Yeah, I think great servant for English cricket, and I think he, as I say, he came when they were rock bottom, and I think he can be very proud of the work he has done. I think out of all the coaches, I think he changed England the most, as in from improvement levels. He left them in a far better way than what he found them in, and I think he can be very proud of what he did in his 7 to 8 years.
Absolutely. Wrap up there. Cool. All right, we'll check Rajiv out as much before he goes on YouTube channel, Rajiv Radhakrishnan. Very interesting, very diverse, very interesting content. And honestly, really quick, easy, digestible content. Rajiv fits a lot into just like 53 seconds. It's quite amazing how he does that. So go and check it out. It's very, very nice, bite-sized videos. And all these places he's been to is fascinating. It's really good, interesting cultural content. So yeah, go check him out, guys. Thanks once again.
Do you put the link of my YouTube
channel? Yeah, definitely. I can put that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can put the link into the description. Yeah, people see us. I need to a thumbnail for the video and stuff, so we'll do all that. But no, cool. I mean, we'll do another video in December, hopefully for Christmas. We'll think of another topic because just you and I obviously go like it's always a trip down memory lane, isn't it? So there's so much more we can cover, you know. So we'll have to chat about that off camera and plan the next video, Rajiv.
Brilliant, thank you.
But yeah, thanks again once again jumping on. This is obviously Shay on Even Bounce, Rajiv Radhakrishnan as my guest today. Hope take care, guys, and hopefully see you again soon.
Cheers, thank you.